Understood, white heavy checkmark. Here's section 1 written as a continuous faceless narration script with minimum 570 words, to cover the 500-word target with extra buffer. It's kept to the point, emotionally rich, no filler, no headings, no scene markers. I always believed my marriage was built on trust, love, and mutual respect. For years I thought we were the couple people looked at with admiration, the kind who made marriage look easy. My husband and I shared everything: dreams, fears, late-night conversations that stretched until dawn, and the kind of intimacy that made me feel chosen every single day. He made me laugh, made me feel safe, and gave me the impression that no storm in the world could shake what we had. But beneath the surface of that comfort, there were cracks I tried not to notice. It started small. Jokes, mostly. Teasing comments from him that I brushed aside, assuming he was just playing. He would talk about spicing things up, about fantasies couples supposedly share to keep passion alive. I laughed with him the first few times, pretending I wasn't uneasy. I told myself it was harmless banter, just another layer of openness between us. But with each passing week, those jokes began to sharpen. They stopped sounding like passing thoughts and started to feel like requests in disguise. He grew restless. Our nights together, once tender and intimate, carried a tension I couldn't quite name. He was affectionate but distracted, as if he wanted something he was too afraid to demand outright. When I asked him if something was wrong, he would shrug enough. Yet I could see the hunger in his eyes when certain topics came up. He wasn't satisfied with what we shared, not fully. The first time he mentioned the idea seriously, I froze. He had been watching something on his phone, laughing under his breath, and when I asked what was so funny, he turned the screen toward me. It was a scene I couldn't bring myself to watch for more than a few seconds, and I felt my face burn with shame and discomfort. He looked at me then, a strange spark in his expression, and said, almost casually, "Imagine if we tried something like that." I thought he was joking again. I even tried to play along, forcing a laugh that died in my throat when I realized he wasn't smiling. His eyes were steady, watching my reaction, and my stomach sank. I shook my head, told him that wasn't for us, that it was ridiculous, even disturbing. He only shrugged and said, "It's just a fantasy, don't take it so seriously." But the way he said it, the way he lingered on the idea, told me he wasn't going to let it go. From that moment, I noticed the shift. He would bring it up in conversations that had nothing to do with intimacy. He dropped hints at the most unexpected times, as though he wanted to plant the thought deeper into my mind until I couldn't escape it. I felt cornered by his persistence, trapped between wanting to keep our marriage intact and wanting to protect myself from something that felt so wrong. My love for him made me question myself. Was I being too rigid? Was I failing him as a wife by not being open enough? He never outright demanded it, but his silence whenever I dismissed the idea spoke louder than any words. He grew cold at times, distant, only warming back up when I tried harder to please him, as if testing how far he could push before I broke. The night he finally voiced calm. He said he wanted us to bring other men into our bedroom. Not one. Not two. 4. I remember my chest tightening, my throat closing, my mind racing with disbelief. For a moment I wondered if I'd misheard him, if exhaustion was making me imagine things. But he repeated it, clearer this time, his tone almost excited, as if he had been rehearsing the words in his head for weeks. I couldn't speak. My silence stretched on until he finally laughed and kissed my forehead, whispering that I shouldn't look so shocked, that it was only an idea, only something to think about. But as he pulled me closer and drifted off to sleep, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing my perfect marriage was no longer the safe place I thought it was. A line had been crossed, and I had no idea how far he was willing. In the days that followed his confession, I carried the weight of his words like a stone in my chest. I tried to convince myself that maybe he hadn't meant it, that perhaps it was another one of his careless fantasies, something he would never act upon. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the more his behavior betrayed the truth. He seemed lighter after telling me, almost relieved, as though finally speaking it aloud had given him permission to pursue it. I, on the other hand, felt crushed under the pressure of knowing where his mind truly was. Every conversation between us seemed to circle back to the same theme. He spoke of freedom, of breaking boundaries, of how modern couples dared to explore things without shame. He painted it as adventure, as growth, as something that could make us stronger. And when I expressed my discomfort, he softened his voice and said I was overreacting, that he didn't mean to hurt me, that he only wanted to share everything with me. But his words always came with an edge of guilt, a subtle warning, like if I refused, I was denying him happiness. He never shouted. He never argued. That almost made it worse. He was calm, persuasive, and patient, planting seeds in my mind and waiting for them to sprout. I began to doubt myself, to wonder if maybe I was the one being selfish, if perhaps I wasn't enough for him. He was my husband, the man I had vowed to stand by, and yet I felt like a stranger to him. I wondered if there was something broken in me, some flaw that kept me from giving him what he wanted. His persuasion grew bolder. He would lean closer during conversations, lower his voice as though Sharon and we were the only ones to squong. I started to pull away in small ways. I avoided certain conversations, changed the subject when his hints became obvious. But he noticed. He always noticed. And instead of retreating, he leaned harder. He began framing it as a test of love. If I trusted him, if I truly wanted him to be happy, why wouldn't I at least consider his fantasy? He would say it wasn't about replacing me, but about sharing something bigger than us. He swore I would still be his world, that this would only add to what we already had. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that love doesn't need outsiders to survive, that his words were cutting away at the foundation we had built. But I stayed silent, afraid of what silence might confirm. The night he told me he had already begun making plans, I felt my stomach twist into knots. His voice was casual, too casual, as if he were talking about making a dinner reservation. He said he'd found people who were interested, that they were safe, that he'd thought of everything. I remember staring at him in disbelief, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear. He smiled at me, not cruelly, but with satisfaction, like a man who had finally arranged the perfect surprise. I wanted to run. I wanted to cry. I wanted to shake him until he remembered who we used to be. But instead, I sat frozen, my mind spinning with panic. He was moving faster than I had ever imagined, and I was powerless to stop him. He kissed my cheek, told me not to worry, promised me it would all be fine, that I might even enjoy it once I let go of my fear. His words slithered through me like poison, and though I tried to hold on to my dignity, a quiet terror grew inside me. Here's section 3 in the same continuous faceless narration style, no headings, no scene notes, written with minimum 570 words. The night arrived before I was ready, though I don't think I could have ever been ready for what came. My husband moved around the house with a nervous excitement I had never seen in him before, his energy vibrating like a child waiting for a long-anticipated gift. I, on the other hand, felt hollow. My body was heavy, my chest tight, every breath sharp as though I were preparing for an execution. I told myself even then that maybe he would change his mind, maybe he would look at me and realize how wrong this was. But the knock on the door silenced that last fragile hope. When I saw them walk in, for men whose faces I did not know, a deep wave of humiliation washed over me. They looked around casually, like this was normal, as if they were entitled to step into the most intimate space of my life. My bedroom, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage. My husband greeted them with ease, his smile wide, his voice eager. He shook their hands, offered drinks, acted as though he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. I sat on the edge of the bed, numb, my hands gripping the sheets, praying I would wake up from what felt like a nightmare. I kept searching his face, hoping to find hesitation, guilt, something that showed he understood what he was doing to me. But all I saw was thrill, the shine of a man indulging himself without a thought of consequence. I wasn't his wife in that moment. I was a prop in his fantasy, a body he had chosen to share, not because I wanted it, but because he wanted it badly enough to erase my protests. The men didn't speak to me much. They barely acknowledged me except when necessary, as though my silence was consent, as though my presence was nothing more than an invitation arranged by him. I felt stripped of dignity long before anything physical happened. It was the look in his eyes that broke me the most, the gleam of pride, the satisfaction of seeing his fantasy come alive. It was as if I no longer mattered, only the act, only the performance he had craved. As the hours dragged on, I retreated somewhere deep inside myself. My body was in the room, but my spirit felt absent, hovering far above the bed where the betrayal unfolded. I couldn't cry, I couldn't scream. I became stone, enduring what I never agreed to, convincing myself that silence was the only shield I had left. The sounds, the movements, the cold reality of it all, it tore at me in ways I cannot describe without reopening wounds that still sting. I tried to look at him once, desperate for reassurance, desperate for a sign that he still saw me. But when our eyes met, he only smiled, nodding slightly, as though encouraging me to play along. That was the moment I knew. Whatever bond we once had was gone. Whatever vows we had exchanged meant nothing to him now. I was no longer his partner, his equal, or his love. I was an object in the center of a spectacle he had craved more than he craved me. Time blurred. I don't remember when it ended, only that eventually the men left, their departure as casual as their arrival. No apologies, no acknowledgement of the devastation they left behind. The door shut behind them, and suddenly it was just us again. The room smelled of betrayal, heavy and suffocating. He turned to me, eyes shining, voice full of satisfaction, and said it had been amazing, that we were stronger now, that we had done something couples only dreamed of. I stared at him, unable to speak, unable to move. My body ached, but my heart was shattered far worse. I realized then that something inside me had died during that night. The love I had clung to, the trust one had cherished, the belief that we were unbreakable, it was gone, replaced with an emptiness I couldn't name. And as he wrapped his arms around me, still glowing in his triumph, I knew without doubt, my marriage had ended in that bedroom long before the men walked out. The next morning, the house was unbearably quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your chest, refusing to let you breathe. I woke to the faint sound of him humming in the kitchen, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if the night before hadn't split me open from the inside. For a moment, lying there alone in the bed that still smelled of strangers, I thought about what it meant to stay. Could I keep pretending this was marriage, that love could survive after being treated as though my body were a stage for his entertainment? When he came back into the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee, his face glowed with satisfaction. He kissed my forehead gently, like a husband who had just returned from work, not like a man who had dismantled my dignity hours before. He told me how proud he was of us, how much closer he believed we were now, how he couldn't wait to see where this would take our relationship. His voice was soft, affectionate, almost tender, and for a split second, it terrified me more than if he had been cruel. Because in his mind, there was no betrayal. There was only fulfillment. I sipped the coffee he handed me, my hands trembling. I wanted to throw it in his face, to scream at him, to demand if he even saw me at all. But I stayed quiet, staring into the dark liquid while the truth pulsed inside me. He had broken something sacred, something that could never be repaired. He thought he had given us an experience to treasure, while all I felt was a wound too deep to ever close. In the days that followed, he carried on with his life as though we had reached a new level of intimacy. He looked at me with adoration, touched me with ease, smiled at me like the perfect husband. But I no longer recognized the man I married. Every time his hand brushed against mine, I felt the echo of betrayal. Every time he spoke of love, I remembered the way he had ignored my silence, my discomfort, my pain. To him, love was indulgence. To me, love had been trust. And trust was gone. I began to pull away quietly, piece by piece. I stopped asking him about his day. I stopped laughing at his jokes. I stopped searching for the man I thought he was. My silence was no longer submission, it was survival. He didn't notice at first, too blinded by the glow of his satisfaction. But inside me, a decision was forming. I could not stay with a man who valued his fantasies more than my soul. I could not share a life with someone who thought my boundaries were walls meant to be broken down. The next morning, I packed a small bag. Just enough to leave. Just enough to remind myself I had control, that I was not his possession, not his stage, not his experiment. As I zipped it shut, I felt something I hadn't in months, relief. Not happiness, not peace, but relief. The relief of knowing I didn't have to be silent anymore. When he asked me where I was going, I looked him in the eyes for the first time since that night. I told him the truth, that he had broken me, that trust doesn't survive betrayal dressed as fantasy, and that love cannot grow where respect is dead. He tried to argue, to soften me with promises, but I had already stepped beyond his reach. I walked out of that house not as his wife, but as a woman reclaiming herself. My husband's fantasy cost him his marriage, his partner, his companion. And though I left with a heavy heart, I also carried something stronger, self-respect. The silence that once trapped me was buried with the love I had for him, and in its place, I found the strength to choose myself.